In the previous Sarga, you saw the preparations for the great Aśvamedha Yajña reaching their culmination. The sacred Aśva, having wandered across the lands of Bharata for an entire year, returned safely to Ayodhya. Messengers travelled far and wide. Kings were invited. Maharshis were invited. Brahmanas, scholars, and citizens gathered from every direction. The great sacrificial arena has been constructed. The pavilions have been raised. The grounds have been adorned. Everything stood ready. For Daśaratha, this was no ordinary sacrifice. For many years, a single sorrow remained in his heart. Though he ruled a prosperous kingdom, though his fame had spread throughout Bharata, and though the Ikshvaku dynasty stood among the most illustrious royal lineages upon earth, he remained without a son. It was for this reason that Maharshi Ṛśyaśṛṅga has been invited to Ayodhya. It was for this reason that the Aśvamedha Yajña had been undertaken. And now at last the appointed time had arrived. In this Sarga, Vālmīki Maharshi takes us into the heart of Aśvamedha itself. We shall witness the return of the sacred Aśva and the commencement of the great sacrifice upon the northern banks of the Sarayu. We shall see the assembled Ṛtviks, the Hotra, the Udgatra, the Adhvaryu, and Brahma, each fulfilling their sacred role according to the injunctions of the Vedas. We shall witness the vast preparations undertaken for this yajna, the construction of the upas, the creation of the Garuda-shaped altar, the gathering of the kings, the Maharshis, scholars, and citizens from across the land. We shall see how the yajna became not merely a religious ceremony, but a great gathering of civilization itself. Food was prepared in abundance, guests were honored, learning had flourished, discussions of the Veda continued. The entire kingdom participated in the sacred undertaking. We shall witness Queen Kaushalya perform her role in the yajna. We shall observe the generosity of Daśaratha as immense Dakṣiṇās are bestowed upon the assembled Ṛtviks and the Brahmanas. And finally, we shall arrive at one of the most important moments in the entire Bāla Kāṇḍa, the moment when Maharshi Ṛśyaśṛṅga speaks, the moment when hope becomes certainty, the moment when Daśaratha receives the assurance for which he has waited many years, the promise of sons, not one, but four. Four sons whose births will transform the destiny of Ayodhya, the Ikshvaku lineage, and indeed the world itself. Let us now return to ancient Ayodhya and witness the great Aśvamedha of Daśaratha. Ata sanvatsare purne tasmin prapte turangame saravyaschotare dire ragyo yagyobhyavartata Ṛśyaśṛṅgam puraskritya karma chakru dvijarshabhaha Aśvamedhe mahayagye ragyosya sumahatmanaha karma kurvanti vidhivat yajaka veda paragaha yathaviti yatha nyayam parikramanti Śāstrataha pravartyam Śāstrataha krutva tathaivopasadam dvijaha chakruscha vidhivat sarvamadikam karma Śāstrataha abhipujya tata hrishtaha sarve chakrur yatha vidhi pratah samana purvani कर्माणि मुनिपुङ्गवाः ऐन्द्रश्च विविधदत्तो राजा चाभिषितो अनघः माध्यान्दिनं च सवनं प्रावर्तत यथाक्रमम् तृतीयसवनं चैव राज्ञोऽस्य सुमहात्मनः चक्रुस्ते शास्त्रतो दृष्ट्वा यथा ब्राह्मणपुङ्गवाः आह्व्याचक्रिरे तत्र चक्रादीन् विविधोत्तमान् ऋष्यशृङ्गादयो मन्त्रैः शिक्षाक्षरसमन्वितैः गीतिभिर्मधुरैः स्निग्धैर्मन्त्राह्वनैर्यथार्हतः होतारो ददुरापाह्य हविर्भागान् दिवौकसाम् न चाहुतं भूत्तत्र स्खलितं वा न किञ्चन दृश्यते ब्रह्मवत् सर्वं क्षेमयुक्तं हि चक्रिरे न तेष्वः सुश्रान्तो पक्षुदितो वा न दृश्यते न विद्वान् ब्राह्मणः कश्चिन्न शत अनुचरस्तथा ब्राह्मणा भुञ्जते नित्यं नाथवन्तश्च भुञ्जते तापसा भुञ्जते चापि श्रमणाश्चैव भुञ्जते वृद्धाश्च व्याधिताश्चैव स्त्रीबालाश्च तथैव च अनिशं भुञ्जमानानां न तृप्तिरुपलभ्यते दीयतामन्नं वासांसि विविधानि च इति संचोदितास्तत्र तथा चक्रुरनेकशः अन्नकूटाश्च दृश्यन्ते बहवः पर्वतोपमाः दिवसे दिवसे तत्र सिद्धस्य विधिवत् तदा नानादेशाद् अनुप्राप्ताः पुरुषाः स्त्रीगणास्तथा अन्नपानैः सुविहितास्तस्मिन् यज्ञे महात्मनः अन्नं हि विविधत्स्वादु प्रशंसन्त्विदिजर्षवाः अहो तृप्ताः स्म भद्रं ते इति शुश्राव राघवः स्वलं कृताश्च पुरुषा ब्राह्मणान् पर्यवेशयन् उपासन्ते च तानन्ये संमृष्टमणिकुण्डलाः कर्मान्तरे तदा विप्रा हेतुवादान् बहूनपि प्राहुः सुवामिघ्नो धीराः परस्परजिगीषया दिवसे दिवसे तत्र संस्तरे कुशला द्विजाः सर्वकर्माणि चक्रुस्ते यथा शास्त्रं प्रचोदिताः न शङ्गविदत्रासीन् नाव्रतो न बहुश्रुतः सदस्यास्तस्य वैराग्यो न वादकुशलो द्विजः प्राप्ते यूपोच्छये तस्मिन् शङ्गबैल्वाहकादिरस्तथा तावन्तो बिल्वसहिताः पर्णिनश्च तथा परे श्लेष्मातकमयो दिष्टो देवदारुमयस्तथा द्वावेव तत्र विहितौ बाहुव्यस्तपरिग्रहौ कारिताः सर्व एवैते शास्त्रज्ञैर्यज्ञकोविदैः शोभार्थं तस्य यज्ञस्य काञ्चनालाङ्कृताभवन् एकविंशतियूपास्ते एकविंशत्यरत्नयः वासोभिरे एकविंशद्भिरेकैकं सलङ्कृताः विन्यस्ता विधिवत् सर्वे शिल्पिभिः सुकृता दृढाः अष्टास्त्रयः सर्व एव श्लक्ष्णरूपसमन्विताः आच्छादितास्ते वासोभिः पुष्पैर्गन्धैश्च पूजिताः सप्तऋषयो दीप्तमन्तो विराजन्ते यथा दिवि इष्टकाश्च यथा न्यायं कारिताश्च प्रमाणतः चितोऽग्निर्ब्राह्मणैस्तत्र कुशलैः शिल्पकर्मणि सचित्यो राजसिंहस्य सञ्चितः कुशलैर्द्विजैः गरुडो रुक्मपक्षो वै त्रिगुणो अष्टादशात्मकः नियुक्तास्तत्र पशवस्तत् उद्दिश्य दैवतम् उरगाः पक्षिणश्चैव यथाशास्त्रं प्रचोदिताः शामित्रे तु हयस्तत्र तथा जलचराश्च ये ऋषिभिः सर्वमेवैतं नियुक्तं शास्त्रतस्तदा पशूनां 300 तत्र यूपेषु नियतं तदा अश्वरत्नोत्तमं तत्र राज्ञो दशरथस्यः कौसल्यातं हयं तत्र परिचर्यसमन्ततः कृपाणैर्विशेषारैनं त्रिभिः परमया मुदा पतत्रिणा तथा सार्धं सुस्थितेन च चेतसा avasad rajanīmekam kausalya dharmakamyaya. Hodadbhyarjustadodgata hastena samayojayan mahishya paravyutyartham vāvātamā param tatha. Patatrinastasya vapam uddhutya niyatendriyah Ṛtviks paramasampannah śrapayāmāsa śāstrataha. Dhūmagandham vapāyastu jighrati sma narathipah yathākālam yathānyāyam nirnutan pāpamatmanah. Hayasya yāni chāngāni tāni sarvāni brahmanāh agnau prāsyanti vidhivat samastāh षोडशर्त्विजः. Plaksha shākhāsu yajñānām अन्येषां क्रियते हविः अश्वमेधस्य यज्ञस्य वैतसो भाग इष्यते. त्रयोः अश्वमेधः संख्यातः कल्पसूत्रेण ब्राह्मणैः चतुष्टोममहस्तस्य प्रथमं परिकल्पितम्. उक्यथ्यं द्वितीयं संख्यातम् अतिरात्रं ततोत्तरं कारितास्तत्र बहवो विहिताः शास्त्रदर्शनात्. ज्योतिष्ठोमायुषी चैव अतिरात्रौ च निर्मितौ अभिजित् विश्वजित् चैवम् आप्तर्यामौ महाक्रतुः. प्राचीं होत्रे ददौ राजा दिशं स्वकुलवर्धनः अध्यर्वे प्रचीतीं तु ब्रह्मणे दक्षिणां दिशम्. उद्गात्रे तु तथोदीचीं दक्षिणैषा विनिर्मिता अश्वमेधे महायज्ञे स्वयंभू विहिते पुरा. क्रतुं समाप्य तु तदा न्यायतः पुरुषर्षभः ऋत्विक्भ्यो हि ददौ राजा धरां तां कुलवर्धनः. एवं दत्त्वा प्रहृष्टो अभुज्जीवानिक्ष्वाकुनन्दनः ऋत्विजस्त्वत्ब्रुवन् सर्वे राजानां गतकिल्बिषम्. भवानेव महीं कृत्स्नाम् एको रक्षितुमर्हति न भूम्या कार्यमस्माकं न हि शक्ताः स्म पालने. रताः स्वाध्यायकरणे वयं नित्यं हि भूमिप निष्क्रयं किञ्चिदेवेह प्रयच्छतु भवानिति. मणिरत्नं सुवर्णं वा गावो यद्वा समुद्यतं तत्प्रयच्छन् नृपश्रेष्ठ धरण्यान प्रयोजनम्. एवमुक्तो नरपतिर् ब्राह्मणैर्वेदपारगैः गवां शतसहस्राणि दशतेभ्यो ददौ नृपः. दशकोटिं सुवर्णस्य रजतस्य चतुर्गुणं ऋत्विजस्तु ततः सर्वे प्रददहुः सहिता वसु. ऋष्यशृङ्गाय मुनये वसिष्ठाय च धीमते ततस्ते न्यायतः कृत्वा प्रविभागं द्विजोत्तमाः. सुप्रीतमनसः सर्वे प्रत्यूचुर्मुदिता भृशं ततः प्रसर्पकेभ्यस्तु हिरण्यं सुसमाहितः. जाम्बूनदं कोटिसंख्यं ब्राह्मणेभ्यो ददौ तदा दरिद्राय द्विजायाथ हस्ताभरणमुत्तमम्. कस्मैचित् याचमानाय ददौ राघवनन्दनः ततः प्रीतेषु विधिवत् द्विजेषु द्विजवत्सलः. प्रणाममकरोत्तेषां हर्षव्याकुलितेन्द्रियः तस्याशिशोत विविधा ब्राह्मणैः समुदाहृताः. उदारस्य नृवीरस्य धरण्यां पतितस्य च ततः प्रीतमना राज प्राप्य यज्ञमनुत्तमम्. पापापहं स्वर्नयनं दुस्तरं पार्थिवर्षभैः ततो ब्रवीत् ऋष्यशृङ्गं राजा दशरथस्तदा. कुलस्य वर्धनं तत् तु कर्तुमर्हसि सुव्रत तथेचि स राजानाम् उवाच द्विजसत्तमः. भविष्यन्ति सुता राजंस्त्वारस्ते कुलोद्वः. स तस्य वाक्यं मधुरं निशम्य प्रणम्य तस्मै प्रयतो नृपेन्द्रः. जगाम हर्षं परमं महात्मा तं ऋष्यशृङ्गं पुनरप्युवाच.
12 months had passed since the sacred horse
of the Aśvamedha had been released from Ayodhya. Across the lands of Bharata, it had wandered, proclaiming the sovereignty of Mahārāja Daśaratha. Kings had acknowledged his authority. The appointed guardians had fulfilled their charge. And now, at last, the horse had returned back to Ayodhya. Upon the northern banks of the sacred Sarayu, preparations for the great Aśvamedha Yajña had long been underway. There, under the guidance of Vasishtha Maharshi and Ṛśyaśṛṅga Maharshi, a vast sacrificial complex had arisen. Marble halls stretched across the sacred grounds. Pavilions welcomed kings from distant lands. Residences housed Maharshis, Brahmanas, and other honored guests. Storehouses overflowed with provisions. And everywhere, attendants moved with purpose. For the moment towards which Mahārāja Daśaratha had labored for so long had finally arrived. The Aśvamedha Yajña was about to begin. The assembled Ṛtviks took their places. The Hotra, the guardian of the hymns of the Rig Veda. The Udgatra, master of the melodies of the Samaveda. The Advaryu, responsible for the ritual actions or the Kratavus prescribed by the Yajurveda. And presiding above them all, the Brahma, the guardian of the sacrifice, ensuring that every rite unfolded according to Vidhi. And around them stood the learned Brahmanas, Vedaparagas who had devoted their lives to the preservation of the Vedas and the sacred knowledge. Under their guidance, the Yajña advanced through its prescribed stages. The Pravargya rites were performed. The Upasadas followed. Offerings were prepared. Mantras were recited. Sacred fires were tended. Rite followed rite in an unbroken rhythm preserved by the Veda. The Yajña was not merely a ceremony. It was the coordinated effort of an entire civilization. Kings had gathered. Maharshis had gathered. Brahmanas had gathered. Citizens had gathered. Each fulfilling a role within a sacred undertaking larger than themselves. As the Yajña fires blazed, offerings were carried into the flames. Svaha. Again and again, the invocations rose upward to Agni, to Indra, to Varuna, to Vayu, to Surya, to Chandra, to Yama, to Kubera, to Ganesha, to Kartikeya, to Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahadeva. The Yajña fire stood between the worlds. To those gathered there, Agni was not a mere symbol. He was a living presence, the divine messenger who carried offerings from earth to the celestial realms. And so the invocations continued. The smoke rose heavenward. The mantras echoed through the great hall. And the Aśvamedha of Mahārāja Daśaratha entered its first great movement. As the Aśvamedha continued, the Yajña grounds became a meeting place for the people of Bharata. Not merely for kings, not merely for the Brahmanas, not merely for the Ṛtviks and the Maharshis, but for the society itself. From distant kingdoms came rulers and their retinues. From ashrams came the seekers and the tapasvis. From cities and villages came citizens eager to witness the great undertaking. Everywhere, the signs of abundance were visible. The kitchens worked ceaselessly. Sacred fires burned throughout the day. Meals were prepared continuously. Attendants moved back and forth, carrying provisions to every corner of the vast sacrificial complex. No guest was neglected. Brahmanas, householders, tapasvis, brahmacharis, vanaprasthas, women, children, the elderly, and the sick, all were fed without distinction. Vālmīki Maharshi tells us that food was distributed in such abundance that great heaps of rice and provisions rose like mountains. Yet the generosity of Ayodhya was measured not merely by quantity, it was measured by care. Those who served did so respectfully, and those who received it did so with dignity. No one departed unsatisfied. Meanwhile, richly adorned attendants moved throughout the grounds. Some distributed food. Others distributed garments. Others attended to the needs of the visiting Maharshis, the honored guests, and learned Brahmanas. The entire Yajña complex functioned with remarkable order. And yet the Aśvamedha Yajña was more than a simple gathering of kings and priests. It was also a gathering of learning. During the intervals between the rites, eminent Brahmanas assembled together in discussion. Learned, eloquent, disciplined in thought, arguments were advanced, counter-arguments were offered, questions were examined, interpretations were tested. These were not quarrels. They were a means of refining and preserving the sacred knowledge. The Sadasyas who participated in such discussions were masters of the Vedangas, disciplined in conduct and skilled in Vada. Thus, even amidst the grandeur of the Aśvamedha, inquiry flourished. Learning was not suspended because a yajna was taking place. Learning itself was part of the culture surrounding the yajna. And so the days passed. The sacrifice advanced. The guests were honored. The people were fed. Knowledge was exchanged. And the glory of Ayodhya became even more apparent. And as the days passed, the Aśvamedha Yajña advanced towards its next stage. The Yajñashala gradually assumed its complete form. Following the injunctions preserved in the Śāstras, the great sacrificial pillars, the yupas, were erected throughout the enclosure. 6 were fashioned from bilva wood, 6 from kadira, and 6 more from the palasha wood. 21 such yupas in all stood within the sacred grounds, tall, symmetrical, and adorned with gold. Nothing about their construction was arbitrary. Their dimensions, placement, and materials followed the traditions preserved across generations. Every detail served a purpose. As the work progressed, learned Brahmanas supervised the construction of the principal altar. Patiently and methodically, the great Yajñavedi took shape. And what emerged was extraordinary. Vālmīki Maharshi describes the altar as assuming the form of Garuda. Its wings extended outward, its tail stretched behind, its head faced the east. Adorned with golden elements and built upon a scale far greater than ordinary yajna altars, it stood at the heart of the sacred enclosure. Within it, the sacred fires were established according to vidhi. The altar had become alive with purpose. At its center burned the flames, through which offerings would ascend to the Devatas. As the preparations continued, animals prescribed by the Śāstra for the various Devatas were brought into the surrounding grounds and assigned to their appointed places. Birds were brought, serpents were brought, animals of many kinds were assembled. Aquatic creatures prescribed for the yajna were also brought forward. Each occupied a designated place. Each served a role within the yajna. Nothing was random. Everything followed an order preserved within the tradition. And among them stood the sacred Aśva itself, the royal horse of Daśaratha. The very horse whose year-long journey had proclaimed the sovereignty of Ayodhya throughout the lands of the Bharata. Now it stood once more within the sacrificial grounds from which it had departed many months before. Its journey was complete, its purpose fulfilled. Around it, the final preparations continued under the watchful supervision of Vasishtha Maharshi and Maharshi Ṛśyaśṛṅga and the assembled Ṛtviks. The Aśvamedha Yajña was approaching its culmination. The sacred arena stood complete. The Yajña fires burned steadily. The guests remained assembled, and all awaited the next stage of the Aśvamedha Yajña. At last, the time came for Queen Kaushalya to fulfill her role within the Aśvamedha Yajña. The chief queen of Ayodhya, the Mahishi, had not come merely to observe. She was an active participant in the sacred undertaking. Before the assembled Maharshis, Ṛtviks, kings and citizens, Kaushalya approached the sacred Aśva. Following the injunctions prescribed for the Yajña, Kaushalya performed the ceremonies associated with the consecration of the Aśva. With reverence and unwavering attention, she carried out the observances laid down in the Śāstra. Vālmīki Maharshi tells us that she performed these rites with joy. Not the joy of celebration, but the joy born of hope. For she knew why this yajña has been undertaken. The longing that had brought Daśaratha to this moment was her longing as well. The longing for a son. The longing for the continuation of the Ikshvaku lineage. Yet by now it had become evident that the Aśvamedha Yajña was far more than a single ceremony. It was a vast sacred undertaking composed of many interconnected observances. The Pravargya rites, the Upasadas, the Shavanas, and numerous other sacrifices prescribed by the Shāstras. Each occupied its proper place within the whole. Each contributed to the larger purpose. Like many streams flowing into a single river, the various rites of the Aśvamedha moved towards one destination. And at the heart of the destination stood the prayer of a king who longed for a son. The fires continued to burn, the mantras continued to rise, the offerings continued to be made, and the yajña advanced steadily towards its culmination. As the Aśvamedha approached its conclusion, the sequence of the Soma rites continued according to the tradition. The second Shravana was known as Uktya. The third was known as Atiratra. Alongside these were performed many other observances prescribed by the Shāstras. Among the major rites concluded on that occasion were the Jyotishtoma, Ayishtoma, Abhijit, Vishvajit, and Aptariyama. One rite followed another, each governed by its own procedures, each by its own mantras, its own place within the larger sacrifice. By now, the scale of Daśaratha's undertaking had become unmistakable. What had begun as an Aśvamedha had unfolded into a vast sacred enterprise encompassing numerous yajñas and observances. The assembled Ṛtviks moved through them with confidence born of long study and discipline. Nothing essential was omitted. Everything unfolded according to Vidhi. The culmination of the yajña was marked not only by offerings to the Devatas, but also by generosity. According to the ancient injunctions governing the Aśvamedha, Daśaratha now offered the 4 quarters of the earth to the principal Ṛtviks. The eastern direction was assigned to the Hotra, the western to the Advaryu, the southern to the Brahma, and the northern to the Udgatra. Vālmīki Maharshi notes that such was the Dakṣiṇā prescribed for the Aśvamedha, a tradition said to originate with Brahma himself. And thus, having completed the yajña according to the Śāstra, Daśaratha formally bestowed the earth itself upon the assembled Ṛtviks. And upon receiving those gifts from Daśaratha, the Ṛtviks spoke, and they said, "O Rajan, you alone are capable of protecting and governing the earth. We have neither the need nor the aptitude for such a gift. Our lives are devoted to svadhyaya, the study, preservation, and transmission of the sacred knowledge of the Vedas. The protection of the realm belongs to you. The preservation of the sacred knowledge belongs to us." And then they continued, "O Rajan, please keep the earth. Instead, bestow upon us such dakṣiṇā as you deem appropriate. Gold, gems, cows, or whatever else that you wish to give us. The earth itself is of no use to us." Daśaratha was pleased by the words. And so, in place of the earth, he bestowed immense wealth upon them. Gold, jewels, cattle, and gifts beyond counting. The yajña had revealed not only the generosity of a king, but also the character of those entrusted with preserving the sacred knowledge of the Vedas. As the dakṣiṇās were given, the assembled Brahmanas received gifts according to their learning and standing. Gold was given, jewels were given, cattle were given. The generosity of Daśaratha seemed without limit. The principal Ṛtviks has been honored. The learned had been rewarded. The guests have been satisfied. Yet, amidst the distribution stood a Brahmana who had received nothing. Approaching the king, he spoke plainly, "O Rajan, all have received gifts. I alone remain unprovided for." Hearing these words, Daśaratha did not dismiss him. He removed a valuable ornament from his own person and presented it to the Brahmana with respect. Even at the conclusion of so vast a sacrifice, Daśaratha remained attentive to the needs of those before him. Such was the spirit in which the Aśvamedha Yajña had been conducted. Then, as the Yajña drew to a close, Ṛśyaśṛṅga Maharshi addressed the king. His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of destiny. O Rajan, your desire shall be fulfilled, he said. You shall obtain sons, not one, but four. 4 sons of extraordinary qualities who shall bring joy to your heart and glory to the Iśvāku lineage. The king listened in silence. The queens listened in silence. The assembled Maharshis listened in silence. For the moment they had long hoped for had finally arrived. The promise had been given. The sacrifice had borne fruit. Yet the story was only beginning. For even as these words were spoken upon earth, events were already stirring in the celestial realms. The prayers of Ayodhya had been heard, and the answer was on its way. The Aśvamedha Yajña was complete. The sacred fires had burned, the offerings have been made, the Dakṣiṇās have been distributed, and the assembled Ṛtviks have all been honored. And at last, Ṛśyaśṛṅga Maharshi spoke the words for which Daśaratha had waited many years to hear. O Rajan, you shall obtain sons, he said. Not one, but 4. 4 sons of extraordinary qualities who would bring joy to your heart and glory to the Iśvāku lineage. Yet, as with so many moments in the Ramayanam, there is a profound depth concealed beneath what appears to be a simple statement. This is one of the reasons why I often describe the Ramayanam as Vedopabhrahmanam, that which expands, reinforces, elucidates, and nourishes the Vedas themselves. For the Ramayana is not merely a story. Again and again, Vālmīki Maharshi invites us to contemplate truths that lie beneath the surface of such events. And one such truth appears before us here. Most people assume that Ṛśyaśṛṅga Maharshi was predicting the future, that he somehow foresaw events that had not yet occurred. But what if the reality was far more subtle? What if Ṛśyaśṛṅga was not merely describing the future? What if his words themselves participated in bringing the future into existence? What if the Maharshi was speaking from a state in which there was no separation between word and reality? The ancient traditions knew this mystery as Vāk Siddhi, the perfection of speech, the fulfillment of speech. The state in which the spoken word becomes inseparable from truth itself. And once you begin to notice this, you will encounter this principle again and again throughout the Ramayanam. When Vasishtha Maharshi speaks, when Vishwamitra Maharshi speaks, or even when Agastya speaks. When great Rishis utter blessings, declarations, and pronouncements, their words do not resemble ordinary speech. They possess the weight, the power, the inevitability. But why? Because the source from which these words arise is fundamentally different. The common person speaks from fragments, thought in one direction, emotion in another, intention somewhere else, and speech is often disconnected from all three. The Rishis call the integration of these faculties as Trikarana Shuddhi, Manasa Karmana Vacha, purity and congruence of thought, speech, and action. When this congruence is absent, we encounter what we commonly call as hollow words, words that lack force, words lacking conviction, words lacking life. We have all experienced them. We instinctively recognize them. But when there is no division between thought, intention, and expression, something remarkable begins to happen. The spoken word moves closer and closer to Satyam, closer and closer to truth, that is. The Vedic tradition repeatedly extols Satyam Vada, speak truth. This instruction is often misunderstood as a moral rule. But the Rishis were pointing towards something far deeper. Truthfulness does not merely improve one's character. Truthfulness rather transforms one's very being. Over time, the distance between what one knows, what one intends, and what one speaks begins to disappear. And when that distance disappears completely, speech acquires an extraordinary potency. Deep within the Vedic and Yogic traditions, an extraordinary insight has been preserved regarding Vāk or Vāṇi, the power of speech. The traditions describe 4 levels of Vāṇi: Vaikharī, Madhyamā, Paśyantī, and Parā, the 4 levels of speech. Most people commonly know only the outermost level, the Vaikharī, the spoken word, the audible sound emerging from the mouth. This is the speech with which we conduct our daily lives. But according to the Rishis, speech begins long before it becomes audible. Beneath Vaikharī lies Madhyamā, the inner word, the speech that exists within the mind before it is uttered, the silent conversation constantly taking place within us. And deeper still lies Paśyantī. Here, speech has not yet become language. It simply exists as vision, perhaps a direct perception, as a subtle movement of consciousness itself. Like a tree concealed within a seed, the form is not yet visible, yet the potential already exists. And deeper than all of these lies the Parā Vāk, the supreme speech, the unmanifest source, speech before the speech, word before the word. Certain yogic and tantric traditions place Parā in proximity to the Mūladhara chakra, the deepest foundation of the embodied existence. Here, Vāṇi has not yet become thought. It has not yet become sound. it remains united with Satyam, united with reality, united with Brahman. The Rig Veda hints at this mystery in a celebrated verse. Chatvari Vāk parimita padani tani viduh brahmana ye manishinaha guhatrini nihita nengayanti turiyam vacho manushya patanti. Speech is measured in 4 quarters. The wise Brahmanas know them. 3 remain hidden in the cave of consciousness. Human beings speak only the 4th. Human beings generally know only Vaikharī, the outermost expression, the visible tip of a vast unseen reality. The yogi, however, seeks the source, and this is where Ṛśyaśṛṅga Maharshi becomes extraordinary. When he speaks to Daśaratha, his speech is not fragmented. His words do not originate merely from Vaikharī. They arise from an uninterrupted current flowing through Parā, through Paśyantī, through Madhyamā, and then Vaikharī. The whole being speaks, not merely the tongue, not merely the mind, not merely the intellect. The whole being. Speech emerging from such a state is no longer merely a vibration in the air. It carries the force of consciousness itself, the force of Chaitanyam, the force of Satyam, the force of tapasya accumulated over a lifetime. And therefore, the listener sensed something profoundly different. Daśaratha knew this. The assembled Maharshis knew this. The queens knew this. So when Ṛśyaśṛṅga spoke, they were not merely hearing information. They were witnessing truth emerging through speech. The ancient teachers understood something else as well. That Vāk and Prana are inseparable. Their relationship is not unlike the relationship between sun and its radiance. One cannot truly be separated from the other. When we speak, we often imagine that we are merely producing sound. But the Ṛṣis of antiquity observed something deeper. Our speech carries our prana. Our speech carries our chaitanyam. Our speech carries something out of our very being. Observe the person who speaks endlessly. Often he becomes exhausted, scattered, drained. Observe the person who speaks little, who speaks carefully, who speaks deliberately. Such a person often possesses a certain gravitas about them, a certain presence, a certain weight. This is why cultures throughout the world have admired the man of few words. The yogic traditions understood this intuitively. The yogi gradually ceases to squander his vāk. He ceases to speak casually. He ceases to speak unnecessarily. He turns his speech inward, nurtures it, refines it, strengthens it. The result is Vāk Shakti, the power of speech, and eventually Vāk Siddhi, the perfection of speech. In the Upanishads, you will see that the Rishis understood that silence itself plays a crucial role in this process. Not merely the absence of sound, but rather the stilling of internal noise. For from silence emerges clarity, From clarity emerges truth, and from truth emerges speech that is aligned with reality. In the presence of such beings, words possess a unique quality. They seem to bypass argument. They will bypass intellect, bypass analysis, and resonate directly with the chaitanyam of the listener. The yogic traditions further connect this mystery with the awakening of the Vishuddha Chakra, the center associated with purity of expression. Vishuddha literally means that which is completely purified. When purified, speech acquires a new resonance, a new power, a new capacity to communicate the truth, not merely information, truth. So, when we return to Ṛśyaśṛṅga, was he predicting the future? Perhaps, but perhaps something even more profound was occurring. Perhaps his words were so deeply rooted in Satyam that reality itself could not help but conform to them. Perhaps what Daśaratha heard that day was not merely a prophecy, but rather Vāk Siddhi, that flowering of speech perfected through truth, tapasya, silence, and prana, which leaves us with a final reflection. The seed of this possibility exists within every human being, within you, within me. The seed simply requires some fertile soil, the soil of silence. It requires water, the water of truth, and it requires sunlight, the sunlight of unwavering discipline. Nourished by these, speech slowly returns towards its source. And when speech returns towards its source, words cease to be merely sounds. They become expressions of reality itself. Perhaps that is what we witnessed in this Sarga. Not merely a Maharshi blessing a king, but rather a glimpse into one of the deepest mysteries contemplated by the Ṛṣis of Bharata, the mystery of Vāk, the mystery of truth, and the mystery of words that became destiny.